Excellency President Sir James Mancham, Excellency Minister Jaishankar, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to join you all this morning and share my thoughts on India's approach to Asian connectivity. Yesterday, this conference heard broad perspectives on this subject from the External Affairs Minister. I would like to develop in more detail some aspects of the framework that she laid out. We also had the privilege of listening to views of leaders from Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Seychelles. This morning, Minister Li Chaosheng from China shared his viewpoint. To some extent, my remarks seek to capture some of these concerns as well. Let me start with the term connectivity itself. Like globalization, it has always existed in human history. What has now changed is that we think of it in much more sharp, structured terms. It is also more salient in our daily life. And most important, it is less natural and more engineered. In Asia, it has tended to be state-led, and as we heard yesterday, it is both a driver and outcome of national economic growth, with internal and external dimensions. For the purposes of this conversation, what is also noteworthy is that it has become, not without reason, a yardstick to measure influence. Like most things, connectivity begins at home, and let me focus there. Put simply, by contemporary standards, we in India are a significantly underconnected nation. This is a major constraint on both our capabilities and our competitiveness. Fortunately, there is a growing awareness of this limitation, and what we see happening around us, however imperfectly, is a serious attempt to remedy this situation. We are investing substantially in the development of road connectivity infrastructure with an emphasis on the northeast and strategic border areas. The railway policy unveiled last week by the government outlines an ambitious program of transformation. Our maritime agenda envisages port development that would harness the capabilities of the private sector. It is also important that nodes of outward connectivity are linked better to the hinterland. The integrated development of ports and the hinterland, the objective of our Sagarmala project, would surely have profound consequences over time. The Digital India initiative seeks to connect another billion alone in India to the internet, and through it, not only to the world, but also to its own government. This will have implications for their empowerment and on quality of services they receive, even from their elected representatives. Establishing partnerships with key countries is intended to attract best practices, investments, and technology in all these areas. We advocate cooperative partnerships as much in our connective agenda within as without. For a lot of our partners, also for this reason, the promise of an India that is better connected within itself as well as with the world would be a positive development, not just for economic reasons, but also strategically. This effort to accelerate infrastructure building is clearly key to the larger goal of expanding manufacturing in India. That this correction is much needed, not just for its employment impact, is by now widely accepted. It is also central to the spread of digital connectivity, whose implications again need little explanation. These endeavors are linked to the quality of our human resources that in turn bring up issues of skilling, social awareness, urbanization, etc. Any assessment of the prospects of internal connectivity must place it in the context of comprehensive modernization, a framework I suggest that is much broader than just next generation reforms. In this regard, allow me to point to some big picture issues that often tend to get ignored in a domestic connectivity debate. To a considerable extent, we are still struggling with the task of creating a truly integrated national market. Our challenges within the nations are not dissimilar from what normally happens in other parts of the world in a region. That in addition, we also have to cope with our regional limitations is a further complicating factor. This, of course, is a phase of the nation building process that we have embarked on since independence, but it does point to an unfinished agenda. We should also accept that our models of economic growth in the past have not laid adequate emphasis on building connectivity. Since competitiveness was not the primary driving force, neither was efficiency the preferred outcome. There are today enough examples that highlight what investment in connectivity can do to propel economic growth and social change. Not surprisingly, this has become a major focus of the strategy within. There is also a legacy of colonial history to be considered, since it tended to skew our connectivity to the coastal regions, especially to the west. Restoring that balance today, further impelled by a shift in our own trade patterns to the east, is the priority. The partition of India also shrank our natural sense of the region, and it is only in an era of robust economic growth that it can be decisively revived. It is also worth reflecting upon that in India that will become a stronger trading power, as we should expect from expanded manufacturing, will not only require better connectivity, but will have greater resources to put that in place. This, of course, generates its own debates about the merits of our entering into regional or bilateral trading arrangements, but that is probably a diversion today. The short point is that connectivity development will be a very critical aspect of rising India. As it unfolds, its repercussions will extend beyond our shores, but we are still quite far from the day when it can be said that India is optimally exploiting its locational blessing. Looking beyond our borders, there is little doubt that connectivity can impart new momentum to the SAARC and propel it to a higher orbit of cooperation. This is happening even as we speak, some of it through SAARC mechanisms, others through sub-regional solutions like BBIN, and the rest through bilateral or trilateral arrangements. In fact, the last 2 years have been remarkable for a string of developments pertaining to a wide spectrum of activities, many of them waiting for years to happen. They are obviously at different stages of conceptualization and operationalization, but today the outcome of interactions among neighbors is replete with examples of road and rail building, power generation and transmission, waterway usage and shipping, and so on. More than the achievements themselves, they represent a change in mindset. For us in India, if there is a lesson, it is to be more strategic and outcome driven. External Affairs Minister yesterday highlighted some of the key connectivity projects with our neighbors that could help transform this region. We are convinced that the logic of regional cooperation has indeed finally arrived. It will be increasingly difficult to resist these winds of change. You will also recall that India's first effort to go beyond the region was expressed as a look-east policy aimed at the ASEAN. There were a variety of factors at play, among them trade and investment considerations, as also people-to-people relations. Connectivity really took a secondary place. But over the years, it has come into its own, and projects now underway in Myanmar and interestingly in Bangladesh can actually offer significant breakthroughs. The intensity with which we now address Southeast Asia is sought to be captured in the new terminology of Act East. Efforts to build physical connectivity should also close the gap with economic and security linkages that have raced far ahead. The next goal is to go beyond ASEAN to the Asia Pacific. India's interest in joining the APEC is understandable in that context. If the Eastern Front is building upon long-standing policy, the Western one is relatively more recent conceptually. even if India has had a historical presence in the Gulf. The Indian footprint there has resulted in a community of 7 million. That is an impressive source of investment and remittances. But it was an evolutionary happening that was relatively autonomous of strategic calculations. Our energy dependence on the region was also dictated more by markets than policy. That, by the way, is not without its advantages, since unlike many other states in Asia, it locates our foreign policy in entrepreneurship rather than in state determinism. It also holds possibilities of building on the interdependence generated by market forces that is likely to make connectivity more sustainable. The point that I wish to emphasize here is that we are no longer content to be passive recipients of outcomes. The combination of human and energy connectivity offers immense opportunities, magnified by the prospect that this region can serve as a bridge beyond. Our growing capabilities and stronger national branding, in fact, makes us a very credible partner. We ourselves have a more nuanced view of recent developments in this region. The interplay among nations there offer us new avenues of cooperation. I can confidently predict that Act East would be matched by Think West. If there are visible obstructions to this picture of growing connectivity, they are primarily to our northwest. The absence of transit rights there is an impediment to trade, energy flows, and economic integration. Normalization of the situation in Iran is therefore particularly welcome. We are working to invest in the Chabahar port, join the Ashgabat Agreement, and participate in the international North-South transport corridor. Combined with other bilateral initiatives, these could be a game changer in Central Asia, a part of the world that historically and culturally has strong affinity with India. The Indian Ocean, once regarded as a maritime frontier, is today increasingly seen as a connectivity pathway. Much of the world's trade passes through it, as does India's. Its economic potential spans a wide arc that goes well beyond its littoral limits. These waters must not only get better connected, but remain free from traditional and non-traditional threats that could impede the seamless movement of goods, peoples, and ideas. The attention that it has got from India's leadership speaks of the promise that it holds in our eyes. We take a collaborative and consultative approach to the maritime domain and have initiated the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium as well as the Indian Ocean Rim Association. Our twin objectives are to address common threats while unlocking the potential of the waters that join us. India, therefore, supports a range of activities to that end, which extend from building coastal surveillance and offshore patrolling capabilities to offering hydrographic survey services and monitoring white shipping. We work closely with many of our maritime neighbors like Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, and Seychelles. We participate in regional arrangements like the RECAP and Straits of Malacca and Singapore SOMS mechanism for maritime safety. Exercises that we conduct with different nations reflect our seriousness in ensuring shared security. Our record in providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief that was alluded to yesterday also speaks for itself. It follows from the principles enunciated by the Prime Minister in March 2015 during his Indian Ocean Yatra, that while Indian Ocean littorals have the main responsibility for what we call Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, this approach is not exclusionary. The joint strategic vision for the Asia Pacific and Indian Ocean, announced earlier in January 2015, and the IONS are pertinent examples. As you all know, connectivity extends to the realm of ideas as well. Centuries of trading interlinkages among Indian Ocean littoral have led to crisscrossings across the seas and helped shape demography, culture, and character of all Indian Ocean nations. We initiated a collaborative project called Mausam that celebrates this shared heritage. including by registering them with UNESCO by collective efforts of the concerned countries. Our emphasis on retracing Buddhist links or on developing joint disciplines of traditional medicines in Asia are other examples of our efforts in this regard. Our celebration of the International Day of Yoga is also a reflection of our common heritage with focus on physical and spiritual well-being. There are more prosaic variants of this intent that include promoting tourism, liberalizing visa, and maintaining diaspora links. With its huge human resources potential, there is much that India obviously can do in this sphere. All these endeavors feed into the changing connectivity scenario in Asia. The interactive dynamic between strategic interests and connectivity initiatives is on particular display in our continent. The key issue is whether we build our connectivity through consultative processes or more unilateral decisions. Our preference is for the former, and the record bears this out quite clearly. Whenever this option is on the table, as most recently it was in the case of the AIIB, we have responded positively. But we cannot be impervious to the reality that others may see connectivity as an exercise in hardwiring that influences choices. This should be discouraged because, particularly in the absence of an agreed security architecture in Asia, it could give rise to unnecessary competitiveness. Connectivity should diffuse national rivalries, not add to regional tensions. This is an issue that actually resonates beyond Asia because the rest of the world also appreciates that the economic gravity is shifting towards the continent. Indeed, if we seek a multipolar world, the right way to begin is to create a multipolar Asia. Nothing could foster that more than an open-minded consultation on the future of connectivity. A constructive discussion on this subject should address not just the physical infrastructure, but also its broader accompanying facets. Institutional, regulatory, legal, digital, financial, and commercial connections are important, as is the promotion of the common cultural and civilizational thread that runs through Asia. Nurturing connectivity also requires a willingness to create arrangements which lead to higher levels of trust and confidence. A connected Asia must be governed by commonly agreed international norms, rules, and practices. We need the discipline and restraint that ensure standards of behavior, especially by and between states that jostle to widen their respective spaces in an increasingly interconnected continent. Respect for the global commons should not be diluted under any circumstances. Much depends on the commitment of nations to uphold the freedom of navigation and peaceful resolution of disputes. There should be no place for use or threat of use of force. I think we all recognize the stakes. We are also conscious of the critical role that connectivity will play in shaping the destinies of Asian nations and peoples in the next decade. Connectivity itself has emerged as a theater of present-day geopolitics. When diplomats get agitated about lines on the map today, they are more likely to be discussing proposed road connections, rail lines, oil pipelines, or maritime routes, rather than contesting national boundaries. Who draws these lines? Who agrees with them? What are the financial institutions to convert them into reality? What would be the modes of managing and implementing them once built? All these questions carry geopolitical significance. Naturally, every country tends to look at these questions from the viewpoints of its own interests. Connecting Asia successfully requires the judiciousness and the wisdom to reconcile these differing points of view and agreeing on something that all stakeholders can live with. The well-known journalist Nayan Chanda ends his particularly insightful book, Bound Together, with these words, I quote, "We are in a position to know that the sum of human desires, aspirations, and fears that have woven our fates together can neither be disentangled nor reel back. But neither are we capable of accurately gauging how this elemental mix will shape our planet's future. Still, compared to the past, when thickening global connectedness brought surprises, we are better equipped to look over that horizon at both the dangers and opportunities, unquote. That is the assumption on which this Raisina Dialogue should deliberate on this theme. Thank you very much.
We'll take a few questions. Two have already expressed their interest. We have Rachel Pritzker from the Pritzker Innovation Fund who wants to ask a question to the FS. You're there on the right. Go ahead.
Hello. No? Hello? Okay. Hi, Rachel Pritzker. Mr. Foreign Minister, do you believe there's anything U.S. NGOs can do to help support India's, to help support low-cost financing for power projects in India capable of supporting their manufacturing, including efforts like Make India? And for example, our efforts to influence decisions at the World Bank, do you see as useful?
The role of the US NGOs in supporting India's development initiatives, low-cost grants for India's energy projects. For example, can they lobby with the World Bank to support India's Make in India and other large initiatives?
Well, again, there is a dynamic, obvious dynamic between manufacturing and connectivity, and no country sort of shows that better today than China does. The US also did earlier. So I think anything that spurs manufacturing, that encourages Make in India, makes it a reality, to my mind is worth looking at. And as you can see, a point which I made, which is one of the principal objectives today of engaging with foreign countries and organizations, is to encourage them to participate in our domestic development programs. This was not always how foreign policy was seen in this country. It was perhaps, this is historically more a kind of perspective we would have got from Southeast Asia. But today that is very much a central focus of foreign policy, which is how do you get foreign organizations and governments to really help us expand our programs, and Make in India is right up there in terms of priority.
Yohita Mohammed from Malaysia. Can you find a mic near you? There it is, choosing the center of the hall.
Yes, hello sir. I have a question on the RCEP negotiations. How do you and the government of the day view RCEP and also its current progress? In your opinion, is there enough momentum or even urgency for the negotiations to be concluded this year, especially when we have missed the deadline last year in 2015? Thank you.
The challenge in RCEP, as you know, is that a very large part of the membership of RCEP is already connected with each other. So the burden, in a sense, falls particularly on those countries who don't have bilateral or regional trading arrangements with each other. And I think that's a fairly short list of countries, but it's also a very difficult list of countries, because particularly at a time when Make in India is happening, I think there is a concern that any agreements that we reach should be supportive of our desire to expand manufacturing in India. So reconciling, what are today domestic priorities with what are external priorities, I think that is the challenge. My sense is that it is progressing, perhaps not at the pace where the more impatient people expected it to be, but I did get the sense that in recent days and weeks it has been moving forward.
Siranjoy from Times Now, can you find the mic near you? Yeah, please.
So is there a link between foreign secretary level talks and what action Pakistan takes on the information we've given them on Pathankot.
And you think this is a connectivity question? Okay. Look, we had agreed to meet after the Heart of Asia conference when the two countries had agreed on the comprehensive bilateral dialogue. So my counterpart and I were supposed to meet to discuss how the modalities of that were to be worked out. So that was already in play. Then the Pathankot attack happened. When the Pathankot attack happened, then the the governments of India and Pakistan have been in touch, primarily through the NSA, to some extent communications between me and my counterpart. There was also a phone call between Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and our Prime Minister. So I think what the picture you see is of really parallel processes which are working. In the aftermath of a terrorist attack, if you ask me, so what do you give priority to, a terrorist attack or a diplomatic dialogue? I think the answer should be obvious.
The gentleman here, can you walk to the nearest mic? I'll come to you, Michelle. So, keep the questions short.
My name is Chaudhary. I am from Bangladesh. And about Northeast connectivity, I have a few suggestions which you as a Foreign Secretary can take over. One is a road bridge between Sylhet and Karimganj over the Barak River. That can be a joint venture and a friendship bridge connecting, making the first road connection, seamless road connection. Also, you see, because of the partition of Bengal, a lot of river and railway traffic was disrupted. First in 47 and then in 65 war. So I'm suggesting that can we have this Kolkata Jalpaiguri railway track, which was going on till 1965, be restored and a direct train communication. About the air, we have now studying the Guwahati to Dhaka, Guwahati to Chittagong. But the one problem is that the passengers, it's a one-way ticket. Bangladesh is asking that the passengers should be allowed to proceed from Dhaka to any destination in the world. But if that happens, then there will be naturally more traffic. That right could be, given. Another thing about last question is the visa regime. You said there is a problem here that a tourist given 6 months multiple visas, but if you are coming as an in a seminar or as an academic, you are only given 15 days one way. So why is this discrimination? Thank you.
No, all fair observations and questions. My response to your initial observations would be something I said, which is we have mentally in India docketed Bangladesh as SARC and Myanmar as Look East. And if one looks at the progress that has been made in our relationship in Bangladesh, particularly over the last year, I think so many possibilities open up today in terms of waterway, in terms of road, rail, coastal shipping and transit through Bangladesh, connecting to our northeast, connecting beyond, that Bangladesh actually, our progress in our relations with Bangladesh, to my mind, actually opens up now an additional avenue into Southeast Asia. Again, I would say if there is today a model of how to, this is a session we will do later, when we look at how difficult it is in this neighborhood, because as President Chandrika Kumartunga pointed out yesterday, our identities have been an obstacle to our cooperation. But if there is a model today, I would really say the progress we have made with Bangladesh stands out as an example to everybody else. I also take the point about restoring the 4765 connectivity, because as we have now got into very close conversations with the Bangladesh government, on restoring connectivity. I mean, I think a lot of Indians don't know the extent to which connectivity existed till 65 and how much of a game changer 65 was in this respect. And a lot of our priority projects today are addressing that 65, what the small road, rail, bridges, links which were disrupted post 65, how to restore them. On the visa, we are completely open, not just with research scholars and not just with Bangladesh. Any idea that anybody has on how to improve our visa practices, I will certainly take a look at it. I agree with you that it doesn't sound terribly logical. You could have come in here as a tourist and stayed longer, but I will try to ensure next time that doesn't happen.
Musharraf.
Foreign Secretary Jaishankar, I found your description of connectivity and India's sort of vision, both East and West, to be rather compelling. I was also struck by the fact that, remarkably, until the question from our friend from Times Now, the mention of the word Pakistan did not come into your sort of the narrative that you so expertly wove together about connectivity and India's vision. I think now, well, it's hard to say notwithstanding Pathankot, but even withstanding Pathankot, I suppose, is there thinking within the Indian establishment, within your mind and the way that you think about this, that can exclude India having to engage with Pakistan in a much more dramatic and substantial way than it has since, let's say, 65 or better yet, 71? Can all this connectivity that, quite legitimately makes so much sense and is really compelling for all countries? I mean, this is what Prime Minister Sharif and Pakistani leaders are also talking about, is both internal and regional connectivity. But can India and Pakistan continue to be isolated from each other and still sort of live up to the narrative of connectivity that both countries are talking about and investing in?
Well, there's a can part of your question, there's a should part of your question. Can they continue in the same way? Of course they can. I mean, unsatisfactory situations are often the norm in different parts of the world. Should they do so? That's a different question. Obviously, in our view, they shouldn't. I would say, if you actually look at India-Pakistan relations, it's quite remarkable how consistent it has been since independence. I'm now giving you the Indian version. I can't think of any Prime Minister of India, for example, who didn't strive for better relations with Pakistan. I mean, there may be differences in nuances and pace and packaging, and people score political points, but actually the story is much more of continuity than it is of difference. But the fact is, it does take two hands to clap, particularly on connectivity. That we are keen to be as normal as possible. I think most people in this country want to treat Pakistan as a normal neighbor. So we'd like to do with Pakistan what we do with everybody else. But the fact is, there are obstacles, and we all know what the obstacles are. Now, you can't say because you want to do it so much, you overlook the obstacles. I mean, if the obstacles are there, they are a reality, they need to be addressed. And because there are obstacles, they need to be removed. So in that sense, the idea that, my answer to you would be, yes, I think it's in the interest of India and the interest of Pakistan to have more connectivity. I would in fact go beyond connectivity. I think you need a much more normal relationship, but it takes something for that to happen. And for that to happen, I think there has to be a change in attitude on a number of issues, of which today terrorism is a central issue.
We'll discuss that again on the session tomorrow on SARC. There's a final question for this session from a gentleman there, please. Introduce yourself and please pose your question.
Now, two questions. One is related to the second stage of Act East. What kind of expectation do you have as to India-Pacific approach? Second is related to Act West. You mentioned Chabahar Harbor and its relation toward Central Asia. What kind of image do you have as to game changers in this direction? Thank you.
Well, I think what you are seeing in terms of, you said second phase, I didn't specifically use that description, but there has certainly been a ramping up of our interest and activity towards the east. With the ASEAN, I mean, it's a very broad spectrum. I mean, it is physical connectivity projects that I spoke about. It is the traffic. You look at the number of flights, the investment, trade flows, the fact that we are pushing our step. But you also look at the bilateral relationships. You look today, look at the aggregate of the bilateral relationships. Today, the bulk of India's trade is done east of India. And I think if I were to cite you some recent examples of a sharp change, I think one very visible example was that with Japan. I think today there is a different perception of India and Japan, a much greater willingness to invest and to work with India. In fact, in the short term, if I were to look at some of the big relationships which will make a difference on the ground in India, quite apart from the bullet train, Japan would be in my short list of those countries. So, similarly, Korea. I think today there's been a ramping up of relations with Korea in different spheres. I mean, we actually have a maritime summit coming up next month in Mumbai. Korea is the partner country for that. You can see Korean interest today in areas like shipbuilding, where Korea is very strong, very traditionally, stayed away from. So my sense is, if you're looking, say, roughly a decade from now, you will have the content of our relationships with all these states and with the overall region would be much more. Our involvement with regional organizations and mechanisms would be much more. Our stakes would be more, and therefore our views would be very articulately expressed. So, as nations grow, clearly their ambit of interest and influence will grow. I mean, to some extent, we have already seen that with China. That will happen with India as well. And the areas of overlap of those interests and influence will also grow. So that is the broad sort of scenario I would have for the first part. The second, the Western side, the removal of impediments to dealing with Iran. And these were real impediments because, if you can't move money, you're pretty much gridlocked. There's nothing you can do in a relationship. Today, I think there are a lot of possibilities. I think Chabahar is the one which is most frequently mentioned, but we are actively engaging Iran on the energy side. We are talking to them in rail building. We have already discussed with them the possibility of using Iran more aggressively as a transit route both to Russia and to Central Asia. That's why I mentioned Ashgabat and the International North-South Corridor. Iran has the size, the income level to offer the kind of demand which interests Indian industry. It also has the resources because increasingly today India is a resource consumer, a resource importer. So Iranian gas, for example, would really be very relevant to the fertilizer industry in India, and that's a very big business there. So the moment you start going out, you have the capability, you have the confidence, and there are no obstacles. I mean, that's the whole connectivity debate that we are actually looking at.
Thank you very much.